Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Even though we've had one of the wettest and coldest and generally most miserable Junes that I can remember for a long time, the foxgloves have been fabulous this year and the opium poppies have never been better. In fact, the ones behind me are self-sown. They are, in fact, growing amongst rows of yew cuttings. But they appeared, probably through the compost, we let them grow, and now they are having their moment of glory. We will let them form seed heads, collect the seed, and then we can take the plants out and get back to raising the yew plants. On today's programme, Carol visits Aberglasney Gardens in Carmarthenshire to reveal the best planting partners for glorious thalictrums.
When you see a thalictrum on its own, you're struck by its beauty, yes, but they really come into their own when they're combined with other plants.
And we visit the home of the writer Kate Bradbury, who's created a wildlife haven in her own back garden.
I made quite a dramatic decision to take out nearly all of the shrubs and trees that were growing here, and I replaced them with British natives.
And in amongst all the summer colour here at Longmeadow, I shall be planting for the deepest, darkest, driest shade. The dyer's bed was planted up by Rachel and I a few months ago, and Rachel has promised to come back in early September so we can gather plants for dyeing. But in the meantime, it has quietly set about the business of growing. And some things are really apparent. And for example, I've definitely overdone the calendula. Now, I do want to keep the flower heads for dyeing. And my plan is to experiment with a little bit of dyeing with these. Marigold petals are best used fresh. The other thing, of course, about calendula is they're very good in salads because you can eat them. That trug of intense colour might make you think that the dye would be equally strong, but in fact, like all natural dyes, what comes out is something much more subtle. It has a faded tapestry quality that I love. Now, I'm going to put those to one side for the moment. I want to plant these. This is another plant which provides petals to make a dye quite similar to marigold, and this is Coreopsis tinctoria. It's an annual, and the dye they make veers from quite pale orange to one with a little bit more colour. Now, in order to make room for the Coreopsis, I do need to clear some space. Coreopsis do best in quite poor soil and hot sun, and this is really rich soil. So the downside might be I have big plants but not that many flowers. So if you've got dry sandy soil or chalky soil, this would be perfect. Quite a few plants have tinctoria as part of their name, and that is always a good guide that they either have been used or potentially can be used for dyeing. Those are the gaps filled with the Coreopsis, and hopefully that will give us lots of material. Now, Joe has been down to Devon to visit a relatively new garden that has now reached a kind of maturity on a really grand, dramatic scale.
Over the years, I've heard wonderful things about Wildside. Now, the visionary behind it is Keith Wiley, and he's said to be taking gardening to the next level. 15 years ago, Keith and his wife Ros began the transformation of 4 acres of land in Devon into a garden that can only be described as extraordinary. Keith, how would you describe Wildside?
The idea when we first came down here was to try and make a habitat that would suit as many plants as we could possibly grow from all over the world and make them find a place that was happy. Because I think that a beautiful plant is one that is happy, not necessarily a rarity. It's the way plants grow in communities rather than as individual plants. That's what excites me.
And what was this garden like when you first came here?
It was a completely flat field. I mean, when you get down to the bottom and look over the hedge, you'll see a field that's exactly the same as this one was. Probably over the course of the last 14 years, moved about 125,000 tonnes of soil and stone. I mean, I said to Ros when we came down here, if we could raise the level of the field by 4 feet.
That's a bit over 4 feet.
Well, we went higher than we anticipated. It ended up going 25 feet above the original level. And 15 feet deeper as well. But that's, you know, that's just fun.
And what's the inspiration behind it?
There are places that remind me of places that we've been on holiday, like Crete or South Africa or the Mediterranean or New Mexico. And it's almost like you put them into a blender and you come up with a smoothie version. It's a sort of reminder of all of them, but not a copy of any of them. That's what I like, it's that emotional connection, and try and capture some tiny essence of that back here at Wildside.
It's not what the great British public would see as normal gardening. I mean, you are trying to break barriers, you're trying to experiment, you're trying to push the boundaries of what a garden is here.
Yes, but only because I want to see it myself. I want to do these things because I know they haven't been done and I want to see them. That's the driver.
Yeah.
That's what makes me want to do it.
Looking back now.
We're not starting again.
No, looking back now over the last, 14, 15 years, you know, would you do it all over again?
Well, yes, because it's as we dreamed. The dream has become a reality and has the possibility for being something truly, truly memorable.
The range of plants in this garden is simply phenomenal. And it's because Keith has created different aspects and environments for them to thrive in. Here we have a lush palette of plants, plants that thrive with their roots down in the wet soil. So things like the royal fern, hostas, ligularias, regersias, and then shots of colour coming from things like the candelabra primula and the little primula vialii as well. It's just genius. The level changes that Keith put in has done really interesting things for the planting. So on this bank, we've got lots of low-growing plants, which would, if they were just in the border, be pretty much below knee level. You'd be looking down on top of them. But on a bank, we see it in a very different way. The tapestry of plants at eye level. So we've got lots of daisy flowers in here, things like the Mexican fleabane, the oxeye daisy, and there's even a lovely Californian poppy here, a little pop of orange down at the bottom. And then your eye is led up towards this fantastic Japanese maple. And throughout the garden, Keith has planted a lot of the trees on the top of these banks. So it feels as if they're towering over you. You're looking up into the canopy of the tree. As well as being a fabulous collection of plants, this garden goes beyond that. It's been wonderfully designed and some of the compositions are just exquisite. In this area, which is roughly based on the Mediterranean, it's got, arid, dry, loving plants. we see a fabulous composition here. If you turn this border into a black and white photo and you look at it that way, it will tell you if it works or not, really. So we've got structural plants, we've got things of form and plenty of texture and depth as well to that composition. And then when we come back into full colour, it works nicely too. So we've got things like the Lychnis coronaria with the magenta flowers and the silvery foliage, which pick up on the silvery foliage of the nicely kipped Santalinas behind me, drawing the eye nicely through. And then this wonderful grass, this Nicella that he's dotted in everywhere, just loosens the whole planting scheme up, makes it far more naturalistic. I've seen a lot of gardens over the years, and I have to say, I think this is a hugely significant garden. You can see that Keith has taken his inspiration from the natural landscape, but created this sort of stylized dreamscape, incorporating so many different plants from all over the world, but putting them together with an artist's eye. But most importantly, the lesson I'll take from here is his sense of experimentation. I was really excited about seeing this garden in the first place, and it certainly didn't disappoint.
I suspect that all of us, sooner or later, want to create something in our gardens that we've seen on our holidays, plant association, even, as I did with the Paradise Garden, a whole setup. But I have never seen it done on such a scale or with such panache. At this time of year, there's a real changeover in the vegetable garden. Up till now, it's been dominated by crops like spinach, which respond to the lengthening daylight and the gradual increase in good weather in spring. But by now, the crops that need heat, sweet corn, fennel, beans, are all ready to take over. And also, that heat means that the early crops, like this spinach, just desperately wants to set seed. It bolts. Once they start to bolt, they become distinctly bitter. Much better to cut your losses and use the space for a veg that wants the warmth and isn't going to bolt as a result of it. In place of the spinach, I'm planting Florence fennel. I love Florence fennel. It's a really delicious vegetable. So I'm going to plant them out in a grid and give them about 8 to 9 inches to grow. Florence fennel is really easy to grow if you have enough heat, enough moisture, and good, rich soil. It is important to water them. If they get too dry, they will respond by bolting, and very often they will bolt a week or 10 days after the dry period. So by the time you see them start to bolt, it's too late. But this is a variety called Zephyrino, which is reputed to be bolt resistant. Now, resistant means that it is less likely to happen rather than it won't happen. But we will see. I sowed another batch, partly to give succession, but also if these go pear-shaped, then I've got a backup. And it's not too late to sow seed yourself. And you can sow them direct. Just put the seed in the ground, a couple in each spot, weed out all but the strongest, and they should grow very fast. Now, I would expect to harvest the first of these in about 5 to 6 weeks' time. Now, at the beginning of July, I always give myself a little treat. New potatoes have long been a Don family tradition of something that we celebrate my birthday with, which happens at the end of the first week of July. So, As birthday weekend is coming up, it's time to do the first harvest of the potatoes. Let's take the tops off. It's a good start. And they're just under the soil here. This is a variety called Winston, which is a first early. Well, I am very happy with my humble birthday spud. But Carol has been looking at rather more glamorous plants. She went to Aberglasney Gardens in Carmarthenshire, where they have a magnificent collection of thalictrums.
Thalictrums, or meadow roos, are some of the most graceful and elegant plants in the summer border. They bring a lightness and an airiness to the whole place. And they're named after Thalia, a Greek muse whose speciality was festivity. Thalictrum are a large genus in the buttercup family Ranunculaceae. There are more than 100 species worldwide. All thalictrums are herbaceous perennials. In the spring, when they burst through, it's one of their very finest moments. And then later on, up come these tall stems, and on the top of them come the flowers. Many of them, like this one, and this is Thalictrum rochebrunianum, have sepals. They form the buds and then they open, and in the middle you get anthers, you get the stigma in the centre, and bees absolutely adore these plants. Eventually, those flowers will turn to seeds, and after that foliage has changed colour, these stems die right down to the ground and prepare for another year of beauty. When you see a thalictrum on its own, you're struck by its beauty, yes, but they really come into their own when they're combined with other plants. Look here at this beautiful, big, gorgeous thalictrum. This is Ellen. It's made all the more sort of strong and statuesque by the contrast with this fine, feathery foliage of fennel. It also goes beautifully well with this thalictrum. This one's flavum, and it's got these powder puff flowers in pale, pale lemon. And as if that wasn't enough, you've got this great tumbling mass of blue geranium, which just lights up the whole thing. And in the foreground, a pretty little geranium sanguineum, which just finishes the picture. One of the first thalictrums to flower is this one. It's Thalictrum aquilegifolium, so called because its foliage bears a resemblance to aquilegias. And one of its most attractive features is when it sets seed. Now, these seed pods are called achenes, and what's so lovely about them is they droop down gracefully from the stems. But the plant looks all the better for the company it keeps. At its feet is this big sprawling geranium. It's Ampholcard, and that colour's picked up here by Primula japonica. I think the plant that really makes this association is the Rodgersia. This is Aesculifolia, meaning with leaves like a horse chestnut. And they're big and bold and beautiful and provide the perfect contrast with the finely cut foliage of that thalictrum and also all these others that I'm surrounded by. So here's a thalictrum with a difference. This is Thalictrum lucidum. It's from Turkey and Central Europe. It's got these long pinnate leaves and they're dark green and glossy. And they make a beautiful contrast to these fluffy flowers. They're light and airy. Perhaps that's where it gets its name of lucidum, full of light. And it's a beautiful contrast again with great big leaves like this rheum. This is Rheum Ace of Hearts. Very dramatic. There's a contrasting form too with this veronicastrum. At the moment, the two are competing. The thalictrum is definitely winning, but later on, when it's in seed, this will have risen high and these lovely purple flowers will have opened up. And there are plants here that have already flowered and yet are still making a contribution, like this Iris sibirica in the foreground. Now it's full of seed heads, but also these contrasting sword-like leaves, the perfect foil to the thalictrum. Within the family, there are a multitude of different species, many with distinct characteristics. Thalictrum flavum subspecies glaucum, Ruth Linden Bell, is a selection prized for its compact, upright habit and its outstanding foliage. Thalictrum fendleri variety polycarpum can be found at woodland edges and open places. Its massed, tiny flowers create a misty effect in the garden. From China comes one of the daintiest of all thalictrums, Thalictrum omiense. It's perfect for a rock garden and will even tolerate quite dense shade. Cultivating thalictrums couldn't be easier, but whichever one you choose, have a look first of all of where it comes from and the sort of conditions it's used to in its native home. It's no accident that they call meadow ruse. Imagine the sort of place they're growing alongside other plants, probably in quite damp, moist soil or on the edge of woodland. So they'll stand dappled shade, or a few of them with the very grey leaves will stand full sun. They love to have a cool root run, so ensure that they're surrounded by other plants. They're much better in good company. They love straightforward, loamy soil wherever you can provide it. They hate thin, dry soil or standing in stagnant water over the winter. And if you follow that very simple advice, you can have thalictrums as gorgeous as these in your beds and borders. Thalictrums have poise and poetry. They add stature and elegance. And though they may overlook other plants, they never overshadow them. From March till October, they keep on giving. First of all in the spring with their new shoots bursting through the ground, to the autumn when their foliage turns to golden amber with gentle seed heads to accompany the leaves. They're one of my favourites. To me, an essential ingredient in the summer border.
I love thalictrums, and we have a few here at Longmeadow. This one, Thalictrum flavum, is by far the most dominant because it pops up like a weed and has these lovely glaucous leaves and then this lemon yellow cotton-headed flower. This is the wildlife garden. Now, this in here is essentially archetypal dry shade. The ground here is almost always dry, and that's because the trees and the shrubs just suck up the moisture. And it takes a very special small band of plants to survive, let alone thrive, in those conditions. And I've got a few in the wheelbarrow, and my intention is to make this area here in front of me a border. I've got a geranium. This is a hardy geranium, Geranium nodosum. Lovely pale lilac flowers. I've got 3 of each, so I'm going to start thinking of putting them down. I'll put that down there. The second plant is an epimedium. This is Epimedium rubrum. And although it looks rather green at the moment, it will bronze up, and then in autumn, the foliage turns a really strong red, and it has rosy pink flowers in spring. The third one is Pachysandra terminalis. It's an evergreen shrub, actually. It has white flowers in summer and will only grow about 6 inches to a foot tall. One in there, and then another can come in back here. Now it's just a question of putting them in the ground. The Pachysandra will grow in quite acidic conditions. So if you've got a garden with lots of camellias and rhododendrons and others, this plant will do very well for you underneath the shade of those shrubs. But I did make this specific area, and I call it the wildlife garden, to try and maximise the range of wildlife in a small space. And it is only a small part of the larger garden. But if you've been watching Springwatch, you will be familiar with Kate Bradbury's garden, because she decided to make the entire plot a haven for wildlife. So we went down to Brighton to pay her a visit.
When I first moved in, it was like a fairly standard back garden. There wasn't much going on, there wasn't much life. I made quite a dramatic decision to take out nearly all of the shrubs and trees that were growing here, and I replaced them with British natives. I also dug a pond, I made habitat piles. I've also got bee hotels and laid a wildflower meadow. The meadow has been the second most significant addition to my wildlife garden. The pond had made a huge difference just in terms of the amount of birds that came in. Hedgehogs were coming in and drinking from it. It's been a real centre of the garden, but the meadow as well. I've got things like oxeye daisy, I've got loads of different grasses, I've got buttercups. I think we should be more tolerant of plants that we traditionally regard as weeds. Even in a small garden, there's always a little tiny corner where you can grow a little patch of nettles or let dandelions flourish, because just having these small areas of weeds or wildflowers really benefits a whole host of species. A lot of people think that wildlife gardening is growing flowers for bees and butterflies and hoverflies and things, and that's a huge part of wildlife gardening. But it's only half of the story. It's all very well growing flowers for the adult butterflies, but if you don't provide leaves for the butterflies to lay eggs on, for their caterpillars, then you're missing a vital part of the food chain. Caterpillars are right at the bottom of the food chain, so not only are you providing habitats for the whole life cycle of the moths and butterflies to complete, you're also providing food for all the species that eat the caterpillars as well. Bees and butterflies don't really care whether you grow native flowers for them, as long as there's nectar and pollen for them to eat. But in terms of egg laying, the moths, the butterflies, they really need native plants. They have specific relationships with plants that have been growing in the British Isles since the last ice age. So in a small wildlife garden, it's really important for plants to work really hard for wildlife. So this is a honeysuckle. It's the native honeysuckle, Lonicera periclymenum. It's a really great pollen and nectar plant for bees and other insects. And it's one of those plants as well that provides flowers for night-flying moths. Honeysuckles really like their roots growing in shade and the leaves growing in sun. So planting it on a north-facing wall where it can grow up into the sun is perfect. Because of climate change, bees in particular and some butterflies are coming out at different times of the year. So bumblebees might come out of hibernation as early as February, sometimes January in some years. And then you'll have other bees at the other end of the year that are still flying in November. So in my pollinator border, I grow things like crocus in spring, winter aconite. In summer, I grow lavender and catmint, and then sort of later into the summer, I grow rudbeckia, Verbena bonariensis, and perennial wallflower as well, to take that season right up to the end of the year. So When growing plants for pollinators, it's really important to think about the shapes of the flowers, because different insects have different shaped mouth parts and visit different shaped flowers. So long-tongued bees will visit flowers with long tubes like honeysuckle and foxglove, and short-tongued bees will visit things like daisies and bowl-shaped blooms like cranesbills. So it's really important to grow the greatest variety of flower shapes as possible for the greatest variety of insects. As you can see, I've got salvias, which have got quite a little long tube, the sort of lipped flowers. I've got poppies, which have got the really lovely bowl shape. We've got red campion in the foreground, white campion, and then catmint as well, which is really lovely lipped flowers. Lupins, when they flower, they've got quite interesting flower shapes, which long-tongued bees really benefit from as well. So I'm just going to plant 3 here and just have a really nice variety of flower shapes. So the garden's largely planted up now, but while the shrubs take time to fill into their space, I can fill the space with more pollinator plants. So this is an astilbe. It's quite shade tolerant, so I can put it on the north-facing border. And it's really popular with pollinating flies, like hoverflies. So it's a really good addition to have in a wildlife garden. So next we've got an astrantia. And again, just thinking about pollinators, the shape of the astrantia flower head, which is quite a sort of composite flower, compared to the tiny thousands of individual florets of the astilbe. It just means there's just a greater variety of nectar and pollen plants going into the garden. So as well as planting things specifically for certain types of wildlife, it's also really important to tolerate the wildlife that comes in that you might not welcome that much. So here I've planted loads of flowering plants for bees, butterflies, hoverflies, moths, but also I've got loads of aphids coming in as well. And some gardeners might remove these aphids even with an organic spray. You know, you might take these aphids off and get rid of them, but I've just left them because house sparrows feed aphids to their babies, ladybirds lay eggs on aphid colonies, hoverflies lay eggs on aphid colonies, lacewings also eat them. And so just by leaving them, you've got a food chain in place, you've got a little ecosystem, and you're just providing a bit of extra food for all the other species in the garden. I've barely left the house since I made this garden. I never want to leave. It's my happy place. I love standing by the kitchen window and watching the sparrows coming in. And last week I had sparrows teaching their babies to have a bath, which was just so cute. It's just gorgeous. It's just the most wonderful thing. It makes me very, very happy indeed.
Kate's garden has inspired the eminent garden designer Joe Thompson to design a show garden based upon it at the RHS Hampton Court Garden Festival this year. And you can go along and see it for yourself because it is open till Sunday night and all the details are on our website. And if you can't get there, you can see the highlights of the show tomorrow night at 9:30 on BBC Two. Now, I first went to Hampton Court Palace when I was a boy of about 9, which is an awfully long time ago, over half a century ago. And I particularly remember the biggest grapevine in the world. This huge greenhouse devoted to this one vine. And most extraordinary of all, it was planted outside and grew through a hole in the wall into the greenhouse. Now that has stayed with me because when I planted this vine, and we've planted it outside, it does come through a hole in the wall. It's the same variety, Black Hamburg, and it's a tiny fraction of the size. But it's doing well. Now, any dessert grape, you want nice, big, juicy grapes. And that means you have to thin them. That's one I've already thinned. And the grapes are widely spaced, but I assure you that they will swell and grow and be so much better as a result. And what you need to do is get in and try and take as many from the interior as possible. And obviously you need a long pair of secateurs or scissors to do that. So you get right in there and just cut, and that lets air in. It certainly helps fungal problems, but most importantly, it creates room for the ones that you leave behind to grow. This is one of those jobs that, in small doses, is meditative and calming. I'll peck away at it over the next few weeks. Now, still to come on today's show. Adam goes to Worksop to join a group who have created a real sense of community and well-being through gardening together.
People come to us, depressed and their lives fallen apart, and the gardens are part of the reason why their lives change, and they've got some purpose and some reason and some joy, really.
But first we join Nick at RHS Wisley in pursuit of all the information that he can gather about the dreaded lily beetle.
Take a glance around your garden, and you might spot a flash of red against the greenery. On closer inspection, you might even think that this colourful creature is rather beautiful.
Now, don't be fooled by the fancy red jacket. This apparent beauty is, in fact, an absolute beast. It's Lilioceras lilii, better known as the lily beetle. And of course, as the name suggests, they love lilies.
In fact, these beetles, and more importantly their larvae, love them so much that they can devastate entire plants, devouring stems and leaves, all the way through to flowers and even seed pods.
Lily beetles first appeared in the UK just before the Second World War, and they were likely introduced by accident from Europe and Asia. Since then, they have spread across the country and are now present in every single county.
Anyone who grows lilies is susceptible to this red rogue. Even gardens run by the Royal Horticultural Society aren't immune. Luckily, here at RHS Wisley, they happen to have one of the UK's leading lily beetle experts working on site. Andy Salisbury is the principal entomologist here, and with a PhD in these lily-loving critters, he knows a thing or two about them.
Destructive as they are, I have to say these guys, they are kind of cute, aren't they?
They are fantastic. That bright red colour, to me as an entomologist, I think it adds to lilies.
Just those little antennae, the things they do, so cute. But over the years, I have to say, I've noticed how incredibly efficient these guys are at finding lilies in the garden. How do they do that?
We found that it's odour. So they can pick up on the odour of lily plants.
Well, and that's not the flower necessarily, but the foliage or...
Yep, odours we can't actually detect. So it's actually what's known as green leaf volatiles. So that the volatiles that the plant is giving off generally from its leaves and its foliage, not that wonderful fragrance we can get from some lilies, which is why, one lily in your garden, they'll find it. And once they have found a lily, they will release an odour which attracts more beetles in, which is why in a patch of lilies only one or two might be affected at first. But then as the season progresses, the grubs also give off odours, which put off more females laying eggs on plants with lots of beetle grubs on it.
But they do jump onto other species, don't they?
Yeah, occasionally you'll find them on fritillaries early in the season, and they will also feed on giant lilies, cardiocrinums. There are reports out there that they sometimes feed on polygonatum and a few other things, but generally it is the lilies, the fritillarias, and the cardiocrinums are the only plants they are able to breed on and cause serious damage.
For such a tiny little garden insect, there's an awful lot of complex processes and communications going on. It's extraordinary for such a tiny creature.
It is, and an awful lot of insects have this complex behaviour, or largely odour-mediated, particularly those which are feeding on plants.
With that kind of honing instinct, it's not easy to deter the beetles from your lilies. So it's a matter of how to deal with them when you find them. Lily beetle adults, of course, are pretty easy to spot with those red shiny cases, but earlier on in the season or at different parts of the year, what are the symptoms people can look out for, right?
Oh, definitely. Many people will be aware of these, the grubs, which typically hide only on the surface of the leaves. They get up to about a centimetre long, but they cover themselves in their own black excrement. Now, that black excrement cover does tend to keep off predators such as birds and some other insects.
I mean, the fact that the larvae cover themselves in their own faeces is truly disgusting, I have to say, but I've grinned and borne it in the past and sort of just physically stripped them off. Is that the best approach?
You hand-pick them, just about, take the actual leaves off. So one tip I always give to people is the eggs are orange and laid on the inner surface of leaves, but when they hatch, you get the grubs feeding away, and at first they can't eat right the way through the leaf, so you get this window paning effect. And it's a whole batch of eggs that have just hatched. The grubs are still small, and you can get 5 or 6 grubs in one go, and that is one easy spot to get rid of a number of grubs all at once.
So if they're left unchecked and people don't remove them, there's the possibility they could almost strip the whole plant.
Yes, and that does happen occasionally. In most cases, it's pretty bad leaf damage. The plants do survive. It must be remembered the beetle doesn't actually affect the bulb. So what can happen if the plant is completely stripped is the bulb will be weakened and may not flower in the following year. But that is reasonably unusual. It must be said, we've had lily beetle here at Wisley for well over 70 years, and we still have lilies. And in the main garden, we take no control whatsoever.
Like many pests, they're masters of multiplication. If you don't keep on top of them, your lilies will soon start to suffer. The hand squishing method is pretty gruesome, but by far the most effective. This beautiful Himalayan lily, or Cardiacrinum, unfortunately is absolutely covered in lily beetles. And you can see the damage that they've done. There's holes all over the leaves. Now, if I pick one of these guys off, something quite extraordinary happens. He's actually screaming, and this is a defense mechanism. But something else has happened as well. Lots of the other beetles have dropped off, and it's a phenomenon known as thanatosis. Essentially, it's just playing dead. The really clever bit is they'll always make sure they land on their backs, so they disappear in the soil and can't be spotted by predators. Pretty sneaky, hey? If you grow lilies in pots, some people advise repotting them seasonally because the adults often overwinter in the soil. But unfortunately, this might only slow them down rather than stop them. The beetles are great flyers, so will happily travel to feast on your lilies wherever you grow them. Although chemical pesticides are sometimes used to treat lily beetles, it's not an approach that I would ever advocate. There's always the possibility of cross-contamination, and you could end up removing some of the beneficial insects in your garden. Now, here at RHS Wisley, they're gardening across hundreds of acres. And looking around the collections today, most of the lilies, in spite of a little bit of damage, are looking pretty good. I think this is a good guide to controlling almost any pest. Check them daily, remove the little blighters before they get out of control, but otherwise, let nature take its course. The beetles might have caused some unpleasantness this year, but they rarely cause long-term damage to plants, so your lilies should be in fine fettle, ready for next season. And with such beautiful plants, it would seem a shame to stop growing them just because of a pesky beetle.
I do agree with Nick that it is far better to live and let live than to obsess about one particular problem, because invariably it's connected to a chain of events, most of which you can have no control over. Now, I've been growing tomatoes all my life, but they do say that you don't really learn how to grow something until it goes wrong. It's gone wrong this year. I started to get this discoloration of the leaves. And then I noticed that leaves were starting to wither and die, and it only affected these plants, which are all black cherry. But it has now started to spread onto the next variety down there, and even onto these in the soil. And if you turn the leaf over, you find what I suspect is the clue. On the back is a greyish mould. Tomato leaf mould is a fungus. And I've never had it before because the combination of circumstances has never worked out like it has. We've had a particularly cool, wet June. And because it was cool, we didn't ventilate the greenhouse as much as possible. So inside the greenhouse, we had damp, warm conditions, and you get a perfect storm. Now, the way to treat it is to take off the affected leaves, and finally, I'm going to take off all the leaves up to the first truss. By taking the leaves off, it will increase the ventilation, particularly around the top of the pot, which is the bit that gets wettest most often. Now, come on, Em, come on. The herb garden has come into its third season, and now everything has come together. The Mediterranean herbs like thyme and sage and oregano are lapping across the ground, and set against them are the poppies and the foxgloves in full, luxuriant English summer glory. Now, Adam has been to Worksop to visit a group who have found that by coming together and gardening as a group, every aspect of their lives has been improved.
I'm often blown away by the community gardens I visit and the creative ways people work together.
What is amazing is how green space can become the heart and soul of the community.
The Oasis Community Centre and Gardens has been thriving since 2011, when it opened in the heart of the Kilton Estate in Worksop. On their 2-acre site, local volunteers grow roses, herbs, vegetables and more in their 2 polytunnels and 1 eco-pod. The space is run by Steve Williams.
What do you think it's done for the community?
Well, this community didn't really have a heart at all, and had lost a bit of their identity as well because of the demise of the coalfields. It was a big employer. So people had lost some pride, really. People come to us, you know, depressed and their lives fallen apart, and the gardens are part of the answer and the reason why, you know, their lives change, and they've got some purpose and some reason and some joy, really.
Obviously, it's a big site, but what do you do here?
We work with elderly people who are isolated, and we also train people who are unemployed and do therapeutic work with disabled and special needs. It's brought life back to the community. It's brought a heart back to this community.
At first glance, coming in here, you've got a huge array of plants.
Yes, a massive array. I keep adding to it all the time.
Yeah.
It's my ambition to have plants from everywhere in the world, and one of every kind of plant. I'm not quite there yet.
Exactly. Yeah,
But I'm on the way.
Steve's not joking. He's planted a heritage crop, which was probably introduced by the Romans for its medicinal properties, and then became widely cultivated in this area during medieval times. Licorice.
It was used as a sweetener until sugarcane became available, and then slowly it disappeared. But it needs really deep soil, so it's got a big taproot that goes down, because it's that root that you harvest over a few years. It's a lovely looking plant, so I think I might be giving this one a go at home.
Steve supported the volunteers to create a wildflower meadow, a willow tunnel for children, and they upcycle whenever they can. This sustainable ethos extends to their plants. They usually grow from seed, and today the ladies are busy pricking out.
Here we go. I've been sent with some more plants for you.
Thank you very much.
So what got you involved then? Was it just coming down on the social side to start with? Or?
Because there were so many plants wanted doing, and Steve said you can't go wrong if we give you a tray of plants. So, yeah.
And away you go. So what does this place really mean to you?
It means everything. I mean, it's the difference in getting up and having something to do and getting up and just sitting around the house. When you live on your own, it's not nice just being in 4 walls all the time. when you're together in company, it makes such a difference.
It makes life worth living if you've got something to get up for in the morning. And this is one of the nicest things you could do.
And what would it be like if this place wasn't here?
I personally would be bored to tears.
Would you really?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah. I mean, where would you go to find the companionship and the friendliness that you get here?
Well, thank you. It's been lovely to meet you all, anyway.
Lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
The garden is regularly used by people with special and therapeutic needs. Today I'm joining some of the volunteers, led by Mark, to plant up some hanging baskets.
So, how long have you been doing this?
About 3 years.
And how long have you been working with the lads?
Callum and Thomas last year.
Yeah.
And Liam the year before, I think it was. So.
Brilliant. So what do you enjoy about coming?
Everything.
Everything?
Yeah. We do planting.
Yeah.
Water plants.
Water plants.
Sowing seeds?
Sowing seeds.
Sow seeds.
Yeah. Is it amazing when they just start to come out the ground?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Have you got one favourite plant that you've really started to grow that you enjoy?
Beans.
You love growing beans?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like eating them as well? That's good.
Carrots.
You like carrots as well?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So we're going to plant up this hanging basket.
Yeah.
Yeah? Come on in, show me how to do it. All right?
Yours and me.
That's it, mate. That's a nice one, isn't it? To maybe get that over the edge, because that'll grow over the edge there, wouldn't it? I'll say show me how to do it, and then I'll start telling you what to do. Sorry, it's my nature.
What do I do with that?
Just work that composting around there.
Yeah.
That's it. And look, where those roots are coming through, they're holding it. So if you just wipe those off, and now give it a squeeze, hopefully it'll come out.
Yeah.
All right? So if we work that one in there...
You do one and I'll do
You got
the
one?
next one?
That's it, good. Can you get that in there?
Yes, I can.
Brilliant. Before you came here, did you guys know each other, or did you meet when you came here?
We went to college together.
Oh, you went to college together?
College.
Oh, yeah. What did you do at college?
We did woodwork,
Oh, brilliant.
gardening,
Yeah.
small animal care and cooking.
Fantastic. So not only can you grow the carrots and the beans, you can cook them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant, brilliant. You should be pleased with that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Only got about another 10, 15 to do. We better crack on then, shall we? Shall we? Where do we take this? Where do we put them? Tommy, you leading? It's going in there, is it? Come on then, let's go. You lead the way. Tell me where.
Someone else who has really felt the benefits of this garden is Gordon, who works in this eco-pod. And I've been dying to find out what happens in here.
Hello, Gordon.
Hi, Adam, you all right?
Yeah, you. What are you up to, mate?
Just planting a few of the babies off into here.
You've got rather a lot of cactus in it, mate. Cacti and succulents. What,
I have, yes.
When did you start doing this?
About 2.5 years ago.
Yeah?
I started off with probably that money.
So you built the whole stock in here?
Yes.
He was suffering from social isolation and depression until he started coming here.
So in a sense, mate, you wouldn't actually leave the house?
No, I was just up in the house.
Did you?
Start doing everything.
And just what? Just close yourself in?
Close in, yeah.
Yeah.
Then I felt like I was like, just existed, not living at all.
So in a sense, Steve really pulled you out yourself?
Yeah.
And so what did you think about, you know, when he suggested that it might be an idea if you came over and did some gardening?
I thought, well, I'll give it a go. But now I'm look forward to it.
It's incredible, isn't it, the power of a garden or a plant?
Plants.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's just, you can nurture one, can't you? You can see them grow from nothing to what they are now. Nice, beautiful plants.
Yeah.
I'm making a lot of people happy, hopefully. That's the main thing.
That's right.
Make yourself happy, make someone else happy.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't realise what you've achieved here until you look back.
No.
And when you look back, you think, God, that's scary.
Yeah. It's good though, isn't it?
Oh, yes, it's scary in a good way.
Yeah.
From a place of real darkness, Gordon's emerged, developing his cactus kingdom, selling hundreds of plants to visitors for the benefit of the garden. For me, that transformation encapsulates what this place is all about.
That's been an absolutely incredible day. I think it's really demonstrated just the profound effect garden's going to have on people and also that wider community.
Incredible.
Well, I don't think anybody could fail to be moved and inspired by that. And it's very simple. You don't have to do a lot to bind people together through gardening. Although the opium poppies have been really good this year and still are, the poor old oriental poppies have had a terrible time of it. They have hated the weather. Most of them never even made it to opening, like this one here. So the only thing to do is to cut them back hard. Take them right back to the base. That goes to the compost heap. And now they're cut back, they will regrow, and if the rest of the summer is kind, they will reflower round about the end of August and early September. Okay, that's one little job for this weekend. Here are some more. Sweet peas are flowering well this year. But to keep that flowering going as long as possible, it's important to pick them over regularly. And I found if you pick them all at once, every 8 to 10 days, this produces the most flowers and the least seed pods. Now is a good time to trim any box hedging or box topiary. But to reduce the risk of box blight, only do so when you have 3 consecutive dry days. I like to use hand shears, but whatever you cut with, make sure that it is as sharp as possible, and this also reduces the risk of infection. As all soft fruit is ripening and turning red, they become irresistible to birds. So to keep them off until you're ready to pick them, they will need netting. But whether it be currants or cherries like this, it is important to pull the netting taut so that the birds don't get tangled in the mesh. This is a rose that I love. We used to have it in the jewel garden. It's called Charlotte Glut. And it starts out this intense magenta, and as it fades, it becomes pinker. Here in the orchard beds, it's got much more room to grow big and to sprawl. But in the jewel garden, it had less space, and I had to prune it harder. And when I did prune it, I always used to wear a crash helmet because the spikes stuck in my skull and were really painful. Nevertheless, I forgive it that because it's absolutely lovely. And that's it for today. I shan't be here at Longmeadow next week because we've got a wildflower special, celebrating everything to do with wildflowers and meadows. So join myself and the team next Friday at 9 o'clock. So until then, bye-bye.